My name's Ellen Samples, and I'm the Director of Programming for CALS. And one of the things that I get to do and be a part of every year is our Six Bridges Book Festival. This is not the first or not the last time you'll hear me talk about the Six Bridges Book Festival tonight, but I wanted to mention to you that one of the things that we really strive to do at CALS is to bring experiences with authors, celebrating reading and books to the Central Arkansas area. And we are excited tonight, as I hope you are, to welcome Karin Slaughter to Little Rock. So she has just released a new book on Tuesday. You have it probably in your lap. And we're part of her book tour, so that's a very exciting thing to be a part of. She's going to come out in a few minutes and be in conversation with a CALS staff member named Kelli Marks, and I get to introduce Kelli, who will then introduce you to Karin. So, Kelli Marks is a multi-passionate individual who has pursued dual careers in marketing and baking. Those things go together. Her professional background includes years of writing and advertising. Kelli is also an award-winning pastry chef. And after 10 years in the food and beverage industry, she returned to her love of writing and joined the Central Arkansas Library System, where she works on our communications team. She enjoys writing about the system's variety of programs and services, and she does a really good job of it, I'll just say. In 2021, her two passions collided when she published her first cookbook, Easy One Bowl Baking, and in her spare time, she enjoys binging psychological thrillers at the beach, which sounds like a good gig. Kelli's going to come out and introduce you to the real star of the show, but please help me to welcome Kelli Marks.
We were back there. Hello?
Hi. You know what? I'm going to be obnoxious because I am in the marketing department here at CALS. And Stuart, who is, anybody follow us on Facebook and Instagram? Yeah, that's Stuart, okay? Stuart is pretty awesome, and he would love to see your smiling faces, okay? Can I get, let me get a pen out here. We need to see these books, okay? Let's get the books up in the air, okay? Yeah, we're doing this. Okay, ready? Here we go. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, guys, for indulging me. I appreciate that. Karin Slaughter is one of the world's most popular storytellers. She is the author of more than 20 instant New York Times best-selling novels, including the Edgar-nominated Coptown and standalone novels The Good Daughter and Pretty Girls. An international bestseller, Slaughter is published in 120 countries with more than 40 million copies sold across the globe. Pieces of Her is a #1 Netflix original series. Will Trent is a hit television series starring Ramon Rodriguez on ABC, and it was just announced about the adaptation of The Good Daughter, which Karin adapted herself. Karin Slaughter is the founder of the Save the Libraries Project, a nonprofit organization established to support libraries and library programming. And we are so honored to have her here at the CALS Ron Robinson Theater today. So let's give it up for Karin.
Hello.
Is that good? Yes.
Hello.
All right, guys, so we're just going to jump right in. Obviously, we're here with the library, so let's talk about your Save the Libraries campaign. What inspired you to start that?
Well, I grew up going to the library, and I loved the library, and I was one of those kids whose parents were awful and just dropped me off on a Saturday, every Saturday. And I would just sit in the back and read everything I could get my hands on. And it was such a wonderful start for me to have access to reading, and reading all kinds of books, and not just children's books or age-appropriate books, but really awful books that, that have given me a great career here. And so I realized in 2008, as we all did, that libraries were under pressure, their budgets were being cut, and I thought it's something we need to give back to. So I started Save the Libraries. I roped in a lot of authors to do fundraisers. I realized really quickly that fundraisers generally pay for themselves. They're great for raising awareness, but not so much raising money. And since the authors I was begging to do these things were authors who were successful, I said, how much would you pay to not go to a fundraiser? And so we just took that money and started giving block grants to libraries to do whatever they need. If they need to fix a toilet or paint the walls or do a reading circle or whatever, then they can have the money. And we've given away over $500,000 so far.
Love it. Okay, so I was coming up with questions, and I had a friend said, I want to ask some questions. So I have a couple in here covered from a couple of friends. And she wanted to know, if you weren't a writer, what do you think you'd be doing?
Well, I did a lot of jobs before I became a published writer, because my dad was so supportive of me when I graduated high school. He said, you can do anything you want with your life, but you cannot live at home. And so I painted houses. I was an exterminator. That was actually a drug front. I didn't know that. I worked in a sign company. I eventually owned my own sign company, and I did that so that I could support my writing habit. And I was always working, trying to find my voice, trying to find a story. So, meanwhile I went to college. I was paying my way, which is really difficult to do when you're going to school at night, working in the day, and you're a really horrible student. So I dropped out of college. So I would probably be back to being an exterminator as a drug front if writing hadn't worked out for me.
Well, I'm glad this worked out. So when you're writing stories, what comes first, the plot or the characters?
It depends. I write series and I write standalones. So a lot of times when I'm thinking about a story, my first question is, will this be Will and Sarah, or will it be new characters and a new world and all that? And once I make that decision, then that informs how the plot will go. In standalones, a lot of times I'm not writing about police officers, so I have to find a different way for people to be involved in an investigation without it looking like, two feisty gals trying to solve a crime. And so there are different kind of barriers that I have to look at if I'm doing one versus the other when I'm thinking about the plot. The most important thing is you can have a beautiful plot and characters people don't care about, and the book will never work. Or you can have beautiful characters and not much plot, and then the book will rarely work. And so I try to make sure to develop those things in tandem and think about the heart of the story and how it's going to be this sort of roller coaster. You have the tracks, which is the plot, and then you have the car on the tracks, which is the emotional part, and they all have to move in tandem together.
So do you ever maybe start at the end and work backwards?
Never.
No, the first word you read is the first word I wrote. The last word is the last word. The thing is, I never start writing a story until I know how it's going to end. And I know who the bad person is, right? Because that's a really important thing when you're writing a mystery or a thriller, is you want to be very sure when you get to the end of that book that the author figured it out before you did. And it's not just suddenly there's a butler, right? And I always play very fair with the reader, and I make sure that when you get to the end, you don't think, what the hell just happened? You know, you think, oh, I can't believe I missed this. Or if you're smarter than me and you figure it out, then you want to keep reading because you want to know how Will and Sarah figure it out, or how, you know, the story plays out.
I really thought I got Pretty Girls like 3 times. I was like, oh, no, that's not what's happening. So how do you organize your characters' bios to ensure that you keep all of your details straight?
Well, I used to be better at it when my brain was younger. But now I'm writing a lot more things down. But even in some of the earlier Will Trents, he's like 34 in one book and he's 33 in the next one. So it's fiction, y'all, okay? So there are some mistakes, but you know, when you write a series at a publishing house, they have what's called a Bible of the character, and particularly when you have a TV show, so that they keep things consistent from book to book. So I'm very lucky that we have these things now for reference.
So one of the things that I noticed is that the majority of your books do have some very strong elements of violence. Some of them are a little hard to read at times. I still enjoy them, you know. How are you able to kind of put that away? Like, how do you deal with that?
Well, I mean, I think that I'm uniquely prepared because I'm a woman who lives in the world to kind of ignore the kind of violence and aggression that women deal with on an almost daily basis. A few years ago, I was with a bunch of friends of mine. We all met for a conference in New York called Thriller Fest, and we were at dinner, and one of my friends had just been flashed, and we started talking about the first time we were flashed. And most of us were 12 or 13 years old. I was on a field trip to see, with my church, to see a museum, and it was me and a bunch of other girls on a school bus. And this guy who was in a business suit just unzipped his pants. And so we were talking about this and laughing about it because you have to laugh, otherwise you would just think, my God, what a horrible world we live in. And we should say not all men, you know, but it's a lot of men. And so I'm aware of that. I'm also, you know, I do take an unflinching look at violence. And that's a very deliberate choice on my part. You know, there are lots of books that fade to black or they don't talk about the hard stuff. But when I was growing up, my grandmother was being horrifically abused by my grandfather. And he was just a terrible, terrible person. And we would go to Sunday dinner with her and with the rest of my family. And she would have a black eye or a cut lip or a broken bone. And my 8 strapping uncles would tease her about being clumsy. And so I said to my sister as I got older, she's not clumsy. You know, I figured out what was going on. And she said, we don't talk about it. And it's a private thing, and we never talk about it to other people. And that was really the kind of life that we had with this. And it's not uncommon, particularly for that time period, but even today, to not talk about it. And so one thing I really understood, even as a child, was our silence never helped her. It only helped him. And pretending like it wasn't going on didn't make it even any less horrible. In some ways, it made it more horrible because she was so isolated and alone. And so when I started writing these books, I thought, I'm going to write about it in a very real way. I'm not going to turn away from it. I'm going to show what violence feels like from a woman's perspective. That was something that you didn't often read about in books. And I'll tell you what, when I first started touring with it, there were a lot of older white guys who were freaked the hell out by my books. And I realized that, you know, a certain type of guy just is not comfortable reading about violence from a woman's perspective. You know, they like the tough guy books where Spencer comes in and he kicks butt and, you know, where the man is the hero and everything is very black and white. And the thing about violence against women is it's just filled with shades of gray. And I want to talk about that. But I will say, I do have books where men die and no one cares. So I had one book where 3 guys were brutally murdered, and all the reviews were like, "Oh, great book, great book." The next one woman died, and they were like, "Oh my God, this is the most violent book you've ever written."
Maybe the guys deserved it. I don't know. I didn't write that one. Can you talk a little bit about your approach to socially conscious storytelling? And it kind of goes with what you were just.
Yeah, the thing is, I think all novels have a moral compass, and that's the writer saying, I'm going to write about this versus that. And the thing about crime novels is we're usually writing a book a year, so we're very topical in a way. We're seeing what's going on in the world. Weirdly, a lot of crime novels predict things. I remember on 9/11 thinking, this is like that Tom Clancy novel, right, where the plane hits the White House. And actually, after 9/11, the FBI and CIA called together a lot of crime writers to predict worst-case scenarios. They only chose men. I'm not going to be upset about that. But they put them in a room and said, tell us the worst thing that you can think would happen so we can prepare for it. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we're just paying attention to crime and what's going on in society. So in a lot of ways, it's our job to hold up a mirror and say, look, this is what's going on. Now, the other side of that is I'm writing fiction for fun, right? And I want you to be on a beach and enjoy it. And if you want to get a message out of it, that's great. But if you just want murder, sex, and chihuahuas, that's there too. So it's a delicate balance, and I never think I'm going to put in a social issue at the expense of just telling a good story.
So where do you get all of your technical information, like the police information on things? Do you have a background in criminal studies?
My aunt, step-aunt when I was growing up, was the chief of detectives in the town next to ours. And I saw what policing was like from her perspective, and that was fascinating. And one of the things you learn very quickly when you write crime novels is you're going to have a lot of people approach you and say, I'm an expert in this or that. I remember my first book tour had several men come up to me and say, do you want to see a dead body? And I would say, are you with the medical examiner's office? None of them were. But the thing is, as a writer of fiction, you have to find someone who can relate to you what they're a specialist in a way that you understand so that you can then turn it into a story. And so you could have the world expert in toenail clippings, which there is one, but if it can be too technical and too dry in their toenail clipping stories, then they're not going to be helpful. So I have a wonderful guy named David Harper, who's a doctor, and he lives in Texas, and his wife is a pediatrician, and his brother works at a body farm. So this is like, you could not find a more perfect family for me. And I'll say to David, I want to do this, and I want to, and he'll say, well, do they need to live, or what do you? And I'm like, they need to live long enough to give a clue, or whatever. And I do have, over the years, I've developed some understanding of some medical stuff and how to use the language, because every specialty has a particular language. Even in libraries, you talk to someone of them, and you're like, okay, I don't understand what you're saying. Just give me a book. But David's really good at helping me figure out these really big medical sorts of things with Sarah, and it's important to me to get them right, because a lot of times, even me being a goober, I know when I see something on television or read it in a book, that's not how it happens, right? So I want to give it at least a good try to get it as accurate as I can, so that no one is taken out of the story.
Now, I read something where you were talking about, you kind of changed up how you were setting your books. You used to kind of go with this timeless background, and then starting with Will Trent, I believe, you change that a little bit.
Yes. So when I wrote
Grant County, the first 6 books I wrote, I wanted to not anchor them in any time or place. And Grant County is not a real town, though people still email me and say you can't get to Savannah that way. And I really was just aware of when you're writing one a year, how quickly things might get dated. So I was very careful about that. And then as I wrote more, I thought, the themes I'm writing about are just consistent themes throughout history. And so it's, particularly when you're writing about a small town, you're writing about a microcosm of the country. And I know from traveling through the United States, through Europe, through the world, that everywhere you go, there are these small communities, and they're almost exactly the same. There's the town busybody and the preacher who's telling everybody what to do while his mistress is on the side. And, there are all these secrets and everything. And whether it's, outside of Rotterdam in the Netherlands or Rotterdam in New York City or wherever you're talking about, even within a city like New York, everybody identifies themselves by their neighborhoods, and you instantly know what kind of person they are by that neighborhood. It's the same way in Atlanta. If somebody says they're from Buckhead, we're like, yeah, well, we know what you are. But I really loved writing those Grant County stories and thinking about them in a universal way. But when I got to write Will Trent, I thought, there is so much crap going on in the world, and I want to kind of mark that as happening, and I want to write about things that I'm seeing, like particularly in Georgia. We're one of the few states, every state has some kind of oddball militias going on, but Georgia, it's actually legal. And so we've got, it's particularly in North Georgia, a lot of these militias, and they're fun to write about because they do crazy things. And I mean fun as in I'm a crime writer, so the worse people are, the better it is for my business. And so that's the sort of thing to write about, the white supremacist movement, all these things that are happening. And I just thought, I need to anchor this in time and place just as a document of what's going on in the world.
So what does a successful day of writing a book look like? Is that a page count, word count, story development?
I don't go by word count. Most people do. I go by page count. And, it's weird because to me, a successful day is I feel like I've accomplished what I had in my brain to accomplish. And what I do when I'm writing is I live primarily in Atlanta, but I have a cabin in the North Georgia mountains, and I'll go up there for 2 weeks at a time. And I can't even take my cat because he's so beautiful and adorable, and he would just distract me all the time. But I sit with my laptop, I wake up, I sit with my laptop, I start writing, and I don't stop until I can't write anymore. And then I go to sleep, and then I get up and do the same thing. And to me, that's the most rewarding part of my life. I love writing. Don't get me wrong, it's not easy. You would think that having written so many books, each time it gets easier, but it's harder because I want to do something new and different and interesting. I'm going to spend a year of my life with this story, so I have to feel like it's a good story and it's one I want to tell. And so what makes me feel most successful in a day is, some days I might do 5 pages, some days I might do 30 pages. It's really just that heart of the story accomplishing what I want to accomplish.
What's your cat's name?
Dexter.
So I saw something that said that you might be doing a sequel to Coptown.
Yeah, I love Coptown. It was a fun book to write. I was thinking about my aunt when I wrote it, and I'd love to take them into the 1980s. It's set in the 70s because so much happened in the 70s for women in policing, and there was such a backlash against that. Who would have thought? in the 80s that there are all these lawsuits where women who had been doing their jobs had to sue to keep their jobs and get promotions and all these things. And that was a really interesting time. And you had great shows like Cagney and Lacey, which you never had a show like that again. And then, for me particularly, I'd really like to write about the Atlanta child murders because a lot of women were involved in the early investigation of those crimes because they dealt with children. And, the Atlanta Homicide Department, if there was a crime against a child, they would let a woman handle it. So they were involved in that early on, and they started to put together that a lot of these crimes seemed to overlap, and that maybe there was a single person committing them, and then the men were like, all right, ladies, we're going to take this over, thank you.
It feels like maybe there's a little bit of, I'm not going to say overlap, but some of the flashback scenes with Amanda in Coptown, kind of like, I was seeing some similarities there, I guess.
Absolutely.
I wrote Criminal with Amanda and Evelyn in the 1970s before I wrote Coptown. And it was a lot of fun to talk to female police officers who are now retired about what it was like in the 70s and to hear their stories and try to find a way to put them in the books. But it's funny because if you want the truth about something, you should ask a retired woman because they would just lay out what had been happening then. And some of the stories I thought, God, I can't put this in. I could just make one book out of this because it was just crazy. But every single one of them, I said to them, why did you become a police officer? Because it's not like, men, my father was a cop, his father was a cop, that sort of thing. Most of these women, their families were just outraged or disgusted that they would want to be police officers. And they would say, well, are you going to have to wear pants? Or why would you want to do a man's job? And so every single one of them had to battle their family in addition to battling the men on the police force who didn't want them there. And so I would say, why would you want to do this? And the funniest story was this woman told me that when she went to apply to be a police officer, she went downtown, and at that time, if you wanted to work for the city of Atlanta, you went to one building and you would go to whatever room corresponded with that job, right? So room 301 was for sanitation, and room 302 was for the secretarial pool. And she walked into a room and a cop was there, and he said, little lady, you don't belong here. And she said, I absolutely do. Give me that application. And she sat down and filled it out. And she looked at the top and it said Atlanta Police Department. And she had actually wanted to work in the mayor's office. But she filled it out and she threw it in his face and she walked out. And she forgot about it because no one's going to let a woman be a police officer, right? So she got a phone call a couple of days later. This is the Atlanta Police. We have your application. We want you to come in for an interview. And she was terrified. She thought she'd be arrested if she didn't go in. So she went in and she did the interview, and the whole time she's thinking, this is ridiculous, this is not going to happen, blah, blah, blah. So she goes home. A couple days later, she's cooking dinner. The phone rings. It's the Atlanta Police Department. They say, we want you to come to the Atlanta Police Academy on Monday. And she hadn't even told her husband. And so she, finished dinner, she poured him a stiff drink, sit down, and she's like, oh, ha, ha, ha. Guess what happened? And she told him the story, and he said, absolutely not, I forbid it. And she retired as an Atlanta police captain 25 years later. But they all had that kind of thing in their background. And if you think about the 1970s, what was 72, you could finally get the pill if you weren't married. Only married women could have it before then. The no-fault divorce and all these things that were limiting to women. A lot of women, when my grandmother died, her credit card said Mrs. John Slaughter, right? Because she never had anything in her own name. And these women, they couldn't eat, they had paycheck stubs and they had proof that they were employed, but they couldn't get apartments because the landlords assumed that they would be prostitutes. Because why else would a woman need an apartment if she's not married? So all that stuff, writing about it was sort of horrifying, but so fascinating to write about from a modern perspective.
So we're all here because of this. This is why we lied. And I, for you guys, I kept the questions about the book kind of limited because, like, spoiler alert, I kind of forgot that nobody else had had a chance to read it. I wrote, like, there was something that we were putting out, I think the reminder email, and it was like, hey, if you haven't read the book yet, like, you can check it out here. And they were like, Kelli, nobody's read the book. I was like, I'm so sorry, I read it last month. It was wonderful. So can you give us a brief, for the rest of them here, a brief intro of the book?
Well, I'm really bad. They call it an elevator pitch. So let's just imagine we're going to the tallest building in the world. But it's Will and Sarah on their honeymoon. And the big challenge with that is they are very, very happy. And it is incredibly difficult to write about happy people. And so when I was thinking about the story and how I would structure it, I thought, I have got to murder someone as quickly as possible. And so you get that murder, you get it in the first chapter. And then we go back 12 hours to when Will and Sarah first arrive at the McAlpine Lodge. And there's a cool little map in the front that I did, so you can see where everything is. But it's one of those eco lodges where you hike in, you can't drive, and they have chef-prepared meals and all this kind of fancy stuff, which unfortunately I had to research myself. And since you know there's a murder, as they get to the lodge, you're meeting the other guests, you're meeting the McAlpine family, you're meeting the staff, and you, as the reader, should pay close attention because one of them is the murderer. And this is what a classic locker room mystery is. And if you've read Agatha Christie or you've seen Glass Onion or any of those kinds of movies, it's where you have an isolated location and someone dies. Now, I read a lot of Agatha Christie to prepare for this, and I thought, I really need to understand the structure. Obviously, I'd read her before, and I realized really quickly that it's a very difficult technical structure to write because you have to find very intense moments of suspense within these confines. And so that was a lot of fun for me to figure out. It's like, where is the tension coming from? Where's the tension coming from in Will and Sarah's relationship? Because they're on their honeymoon, they're not going to break up and never see each other again. And how do I have them disagree but still respect each other? And how do I explain to you as a reader that the title is incredibly accurate because everyone, the guest, the family, the staff, everyone is lying, including Sarah and Will. And so that's the challenge, is to figure out why they're lying. Is it because they're hiding something important, or is it because they're a murderer?
So in one part, spoilers, Will kind of feels like he almost messes something up because of his dyslexia. So he misses a clue that somebody else would have caught. So how do you navigate his learning disability as you develop his character?
Well, I think it's really important to talk about people with learning disabilities. Dyslexia is a language processing issue, and so how Will sees, for his type of dyslexia, how he sees words and things and is processed differently in his head. It takes him time to be able to decipher what he's seeing. And, this is something that Will has unfortunately been ashamed about for much of his life. And in many ways, I think it makes him a very good detective because people who commit crimes are hiding things, and Will is trying to hide his learning disability. And I think detectives, I know detectives, make mistakes all the time. You know, we all want to think they're criminal, that they're masterminds, right? They're all geniuses like Sherlock Holmes. But most of the time, what they're doing is they're just paying attention and waiting for the bad person to make a mistake. And that's something Will is really good at. And so when he makes a mistake, he's much more hard on himself, I think, because of his dyslexia. You know, he misses something anybody could have missed, but he's always going to be the one to blame himself for that. And to me, I think it's important to write about that in a realistic way and not say, you know, a lot of times when people have a learning disability, we say, oh, it's their superpower. Well, no, it's not. It's something that they deal with on a daily basis, and it gives them strengths in some areas, but, you know, it's a real thing that impacts them, and there's a psychological component to it as well.
So is there going to be a book 13? What can we expect out of Sarah and Will?
Yes, definitely there's more Sarah and Will. The next book is not a Sarah and Will. I wanted to do another standalone. I can't tell you much about it other than someone dies. And by the end you find out who it is, I promise. But the Will and Sarah after that, I've got a really good idea for it. I'm looking forward to it.
All right, so we're gonna walk away from the book, because again, it's really, really great. I'm very excited for you guys to be able to read it, because it was one that I thought, oh, okay, I figured it out. There's some people from his past that pop up. There's all kinds of some really great stuff. But instead, we're still going to talk about Will. But I'd like to talk about the show. Have you guys been watching the show? So how involved are you with the storyline of the series?
Well, I'm as involved as I want to be. The showrunner, Dan Thompson, and Liz Heldens, who created the show, are wonderful people. They really include me in everything. I'm welcome to the set whenever I want. I've gotten to know the actors. Ramon Rodriguez, perhaps the sexiest man I have ever been in the presence of. We went to dinner once, and I was like, my God, what am I doing with this beautiful man? And I could hear everyone in the restaurant saying, what is she doing with that beautiful man? But I'm super excited for this season. Ramon is directing, and he's almost finished directing the first episode for season 3, and Gina Rodriguez is in it. And I mean, they're just doing a really terrific job. But my involvement is as a fan, and sometimes they'll text me when I'm on the treadmill and say, hey, what's Amanda's mother's name? And they'll ask me, like, what was this character and how, because they really want to make sure they keep the show as close to the books as possible. And I mean, I know that Ramon doesn't look like the Will I describe in the books, but that helps me in a way, because, you know, when I wrote the follow-up book to Pieces of Her, Toni Collette did such an amazing job as Laura that I had to keep saying to myself, don't write Toni's version of Laura, write your version of Laura. And so the fact that, you know, Will looks so different on the show, and Iantha, who plays Faith, she's amazing, but very different. That helps me keep close to the books so that I can keep them separate.
I was going to ask you about that. I was like, did I dream that he was tall and fair? What happened to you? So now that the books are a successful series, do you change anything about the approach to your characters? I know you're going to stay true to them, but
Not at all.
Oh, no. You know, I'm one thing I'm very clear about when I'm writing is who these characters are. And obviously, so someone's going to probably be wondering this, when is Sarah going to be on the show? You know, keep in mind that you had a couple of Will Trent books before Sarah. And so that's definitely down the road in the plans. But I've been writing about Sarah since Grant County. And I have a very clear vision of who she is. And, you know, when I first wrote about her in Blindsided, one of the things I wanted to do was as a response to what I was missing in other books that were series books, where something horrible would happen in one book, and in the next book, you would never guess it. And they're still like, oh my God, this is horrible. And you think, well, didn't you read the last book? Aren't you a little hardened to that by now? And so I wanted Sarah to change with each book. And so she's very black and white in Blindsided. And now, even now, she's much more into the grays. And I also wanted them to get older as I got older. And I really, when I did that, I didn't realize that I would age as much as I have. And so at a certain point, I'm like, I gotta slow it down. I've done a lot of bad things to Sarah, but I can't make her my age. So I kind of slowed it down. She's gonna be stuck in her early 40s forever. And so, I do want them, though, to respond to what's happening in the books and to change as the world changes. I think that's one of the wonderful things. I love historical fiction. I love reading older books like Pride and Prejudice, or books like that. And you think this is such an encapsulation of that period of time, and the humor and the sensitivity and the mannerisms and all that are so captured so well. And I want Sarah and Will to reflect how the world has changed.
So I heard a story once about Jodi Picoult, and she was thrown off the set of My Sister's Keeper. She did not like what they were doing with the book. Have you had any disagreements, or have they done anything that maybe you just like raised an eyebrow?
I'm kind of horrified by that, because she shouldn't have taken the money. Because, no one is forcing you as an author to do it. And it's pretty clear, if you've ever seen an adaptation, like Gone with the Wind changed a lot of things. So you've got to know going into it, they're going to change it. Plus, as a creative person, I am very close to my art, but there's nothing more flattering than someone taking my art and spinning it into their own. And I might not agree with their choices, but the fact that they're doing that, and you go on set and there are 200 or 300 people who are working to bring this thing that you wrote in your pajamas all alone with your laptop into the world. It's very easy to write that there were 6,000 people, outside. But at some point, all those people have to be cast in some way, right? And you have to pick a person. And so I love what they're doing. That being said, the first script they sent me for the first episode, I hate to be crass, particularly as we're in Arkansas, and I'm going to get many, many letters, I'm sure. But you cannot imagine the sound my asshole made when I read someone else putting words into Will's mouth. And so my only note was, he talks too much. And they were very sweet, and they said, Karin, this is actually a television show, and people have to talk. And that wasn't like, I thought that stop being precious about it, because this is exciting. This is really wonderful, and these people are so talented. And Ramon, no, he's not 6'4" and Swedish, but would you want someone who looks the part but doesn't understand Will Trent? Or would you want someone like Ramon who really understands who the character is? He's got bossy sisters, and he was raised by a single mom, and he knows how to listen to and respect women, and that's really who the character is. So the fact that he can capture that so well, and that, Sonia Sohn is a great Amanda, she really gets into that biting, and it's such acting, because she's the nicest person in person. And Erica Christensen, obviously, this is a Disney show, so she's not going to shoot heroin and kill her pimp, but she's an amazing actress. And I love Iantha Richardson as Faith, because she just, Faith is very grumpy. And if she shows up to a decapitation, she's going to be like, where's the head? And Iantha has totally captured that. So I couldn't be more happy with it. And I'm just really horrified Jodi Picoult did that, because that seems like a really mean thing to do.
Betty's perfect, yeah.
That was my ending question. she's maybe a little less damaged in the show than in the books.
Yeah, she definitely is.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, she is less damaged, but she works with the show, you know, and Jake, who plays Ormwood, I remember when he found out that he was supposed to be a pedophile and a murderer, and he was a little worried. And they're like, "Don't worry, Jake, we're not gonna do that to you." But his character's turned into a really great character. And you know, when I write a book, I always look at the beats of it, like where are the moments of darkness, lightness, and humor. I use a lot of humor in the books, particularly in this one. You know, Will and Sarah get up to this gorgeous mountaintop lodge, and they're talking about trees and the greens and nature, and the water. It's so beautiful. And Faith gets there, and she's like, "Why are there so many birds?" And she's very annoyed at the whole idea, like there's gnats everywhere. And I think it's important to have those moments of humor, and you know, Jake is great at doing that on the show, and they have that balance of bad things and good things, and the core community of these characters together, which is something that is important to me in the books as well.
So I'm leaving enough time so that you guys can get some questions in. So my final question is about Betty. I love Betty. Can you just talk a little bit about Betty?
I happen to know her. She's adorable. Her real name is Bella because she's an actor. I love watching. I watch the dailies sometimes on the treadmill. Obviously not a lot. It's amazing how well trained she is. Like some of the actors, they don't always hit their spot, but Betty's like. And I said this to Ramon, and he's like, "Well, they don't give us treats." But I do. I remember we did a photo shoot with her, and I got to hold her, and so then it was time to take the photos. She was just adorable. And they got a lint roller out, you know, to get the fur off. And she said, "Wow, there's white fur on this." And this was in California, and I said, "Oh, that's for my cat back home." So, you know, it's straight out of the dry cleaning bag. It still had fur on it, so that was wonderful. But she is an amazing. Just seeing an animal so smart, smarter than me. It's really interesting to watch how they interact with people.
I just love all her clothes. And just in relation to Will's character and the dog that he did not want, but absolutely loves.
Well, that's a key to his character, isn't it? Because that's something in Triptych, the first Will Trent book. You know, he gets this dog and he doesn't want this dog. And the last line is a man who grew up in an orphanage can't take a dog to a home. And so they're kind of strays who adopted each other.
If you have not been watching the show, you absolutely have to. Okay, well, that is all the questions that I have for you guys. So I'm hoping maybe we've got some people in the crowd. We've got some microphones set up here. We're gonna make you come, or are we gonna take them? Okay.
I have a question about Amanda. Does she have a pet, like a cat or perhaps a honey badger?
Well, so Amanda has her work. That's what's important to her. And I think Faith and Will, to a certain extent, she thinks of as her children / pets. But there's going to be, in the show, Amanda's going to get an interesting person to interact with this season. But I don't think, she'd probably be one of those snooty people who doesn't have time for a cat because she doesn't want to put the work in. And she doesn't want a dog because they love you too easily.
I was very fortunate to be able to listen to the book this week already, and I have loved every word of it. And I wanted to ask, how do you bring it together? I have written before, I'm a published author, but how do you bring it all together?
Well, there's a certain point in every book where I ask myself that same question. I do a lot of thinking in my head before I write. And Billy Wilder, who's a wonderful writer, would often say, it's written before I sit down at the typewriter. And that's very much my process. So, I'm touring around, and so I'm in a lot of airports and a lot of airplanes, and so I'm thinking constantly about the story I'm working on and how things go together. And, one thing that I've learned to do that I resisted early on was to not write an outline per se, but just sort of a this happens, this happens, this happens, so that I can keep all of those beats in my head. And the emotional part of the story, I think, is really just so important when you're writing these books, because I don't want to have a quote-unquote dead girl book, right? I don't want to have it as a gimmick. I want to make the lives of the victim meaningful. And I'm very aware that there are real people in the world every day who have these crimes happen to them or a family member. And so I want to honor that and make sure that I am giving them the correct amount of focus and time. And to me, that's the real thing that compels the story, is figuring out how this victim's life is going to relate back to Sarah and Will and Faith, particularly the victim in this novel. Will has an attachment to a person in her life. Faith feels a sort of kinship to this person because they had a similar experience. Sarah feels enormously sad about what happened. So there's that emotional connection that pulls you through. And I always think about what is the heart of the story. And a good example of this is a novel I wrote called Pretty Girls. And as I was going through the structure mentally, I kept asking, what is the heart of the story? What is the heart of the story? And it's this father who really loves his children. And to me, that opened up everything, and in a way gave me the ability to find out what is meaningful and how is this all going to come together. It's going to be coming together around the heart of this father.
Oh, sorry. So I have a question about characters. I've almost emailed you or whoever answers your email 100 times because people's stories stick in my head. And there are two characters that I want to know where they are in your head right now. And the first is the guy in Triptych. Is it John? Is his name John?
Yes, John.
I need to know where John is, and I need to know where Abigail Campano is.
Oh, those are good questions.
But it plagues me.
John, not to put too many spoilers in it, reconciled, and he's doing well, but his life is hard from what he experienced. And, there's not an easy way. Same with Abigail, The thing about being a victim of crime or being someone who gets caught up in our judicial system is it's so damaging in many ways. And even, and I don't want to say, I don't think criminals should go to prison. I absolutely think they should. Some of them should go longer than they actually get. But at some point they're going to come out of prison. And the way we treat them inside informs how they are when they come out. And I've had family members who have felony convictions for drugs. And what we do as a society when they get out is we keep punishing them. They can't vote, they have to pay restitution, they are less likely to be able to get jobs. We just have all kinds of restrictions on them that to me feels very un-American to continue punishing someone. Think about Georgia, for instance. We were a debtor's colony. And people who moved there were able to start all over again, and it created one of the greatest states in the union, if I must say. And I think it would be easy to say, oh, they're living happily ever after. But I think that their lives are hard. But hopefully, I've given them enough of a chance that things are easier than they were when they were in my books. Okay.
Sorry?
I need you to write a whole other book about where they are now.
I'll get on it.
Ladies first.
Oh, thank you.
audience in mind, or was it someone in your life that influenced your decision to make Will and other characters in the story come from the foster system?
When I owned my sign company, I did a lot of signage for the DeKalb County foster system. And I got to know a lot of the people on staff, and I got to meet people and, just see what the system was like and see how many good people were given so few tools to help children. It's really, in Georgia, it's embarrassing how little we spend on helping children in these situations. And in America, it's kind of disgusting that we always think kids are in the foster care system because their parents are abusive or drug addicts or horrible people. A lot of kids in the system are in the system because their parents are poor and they can't afford to feed them, and they can't, they have jobs and they can't take off to help their kids and do all the things, give the support to kids that they need because they're poor. And so that's why when we saw money given to parents to help them with children were doing better in school, families were staying together, our foster system had fewer problems with funding. I mean, it just really was helpful. And it's such, as a capitalist, someone who is a firm capitalist, it's such a small way to spend money that has a bigger return because it takes stress off the system. And a lot of that was informed by working with these people and seeing firsthand what they go through. And I wanted to write about a kid who goes through the system, like Will, who turned 18, and they gave him $100 and a bus ticket, and he ended up in a shelter. It's just not giving them the tools in order to succeed. A lot of kids in foster care have never handled money, or they don't know how to pay rent. They don't know, all the things that you guys teach your kids in order to be successful adults, it's just something that foster kids don't necessarily get. And so that's something that I thought would be interesting to write about with Will. And, from a very simple standpoint, in my Grant County book, I wrote a lot about Sarah's family and how supportive they were, and I wanted to write about someone's experience where they didn't have that support.
Out of all the books that you've written, do you have a favorite or one that you enjoy writing more than the others?
Well, they're all different for me, and I love Pretty Girls because it was my first standalone, and thank you. And I love False Witness because it was the first time I wrote a story that wasn't from a cop's perspective, but from a lawyer's perspective. And so I have different reasons. I'm incredibly proud of my Grant County books and the choices I made. And it's weird because I think of where I was in my life a lot of times when I write books, and so there's a lot going on behind there. And I love this because it's the first locked room mystery I ever wrote, so it was taking a big swing, and hopefully people love it as much as I do. But it's kind of like asking parents to pick their favorite child, It's easy for mine because of course it's me. I'll just say I love them all in the way they need to be loved.
Speaking of the Grant County series, I am super partial to Officer Tolliver. So how do you, as an author, I guess, get past the emotional attachment? Like, I was wrecked forever.
I was wrecked too, and that was over 10 years ago, and I still get really nasty emails about how I ended that. And I always get nervous. Every single event I do, someone always asks about Jeffrey. And I was in Germany once, and this group of women in a book club came up to me, and they gave me these beautiful chocolates. In Germany, in that part of Germany, they have chocolates called cat's tongues because they're very soft, which, hello, have you ever been licked by a cat? They gave me this beautiful box, and I was like, oh, thank you. And it was sealed, right? So I'm like, I can totally eat this. They haven't poisoned me. And I got back to my room, and there was a card with it, and it said, "We will never forgive you for Jeffrey." very German, right? And so I got really nervous. I'm like, okay. So I called my publicist because she was in the room next door to me, and I was like, do you want some chocolate? And she's like, oh, cat's tongues, yes, yes. And so I gave her some, and then like an hour later, I texted her. I was like, hey, how you feeling? What's going on? And she was okay, so I ate some. And another time I was on like right after that book came out, I was on an elevator at a mystery conference, like a conference for mysteries. We knew what it was about. And I got on the elevator and I felt so much hate that I was like, oh, I forgot my purse. I don't carry a purse. So I like hit the button just to get off. And as the doors were closing, this woman shouted, how could you? So you're not alone, and if we need to call security, just let me know.
I have two questions. First, is there going to be any more Andrea Oliver books? And second, whenever you revisit things from past books, like After That Night or The Silent Life, did you always know it was going to like work out that way, or was it a new idea about those events that you're now putting in?
There will be more Andrea books when I get to them, absolutely, because I love writing the character. Yeah, I did, After That Night picks up on something that I talked about in Blindsided. And I did know that these things were coming, and The Silent Life, I knew that was coming. I knew it all along, actually, which is really weird, but tells you that one of the great joys of being an author is I know so many secrets about these characters that you don't know. And Sarah's going to find this out when she moves in with Will permanently, that he's been feeding stray cats in his backyard. So they're going to get home and there's going to be a lot of cats there who are very angry because their meal has not been served. But that's the joy of writing, is just knowing all these secrets that I can dole out over time. And I definitely played the long game with The Silent Life.
My question is actually about the book tours. So I'm a huge fan of those. I flew in from Colorado to be here with my sister. We are massive fans here. But I have noticed there's a lot of a fair amount of authors that have stopped doing the book tours. And I just wanted to get your perspective on that. Like, what is your favorite part of the tour and your least favorite part of doing the book tours?
Well, I think we can universally agree airports are a human rights violation. So that would be the least. The panic of, just at home, like the panic of, have I packed enough underwear, or what's going to happen? So they are a bit grueling, and writers like myself, I'm very introverted. So I'll go back to my hotel room and just lie in the dark and just try to recharge my batteries a bit and look at pictures of my cat. But it is a bit difficult to go out, to leave home, to wear long pants, all the things. And I'll say this because you guys are Southern, when just wearing shoes this long, it just feels wrong. But it is very rewarding, and particularly because my first book published right after 9/11. And I remember my publisher saying, a lot of authors have canceled tours, do you still want to go? And I said, hell yes, because I am the nightmare of the people who attacked us, a single woman going around the country, flying around on her own, talking about violence against women and, giving 0 Fs about anything. And so I went on that tour and I met a lot of people who were very happy to be out of the house after going through that. We were all glued to televisions, and we all remember how horrible it was. And just to be out in a community with people who love reading, and to talk about books, and to talk about what books we had read and what was coming up and our favorite authors and that sort of thing was really great. And I still see those same people. I'm going to be in Scottsdale in a few days in Arizona. And I know this core group of people that's going to come are the same people who I met on that first tour. So that's very rewarding to me to do that, to see how happy people are about the books and then get feedback on them, but only positive feedback, please. That's why we do it at the beginning, because if you hate it, we're gone. We don't want to hear about it. But a lot of our authors don't tour just because it's really, it takes a lot. You know, I'm in a different city every day. I'm on a plane sometimes twice a day. And it is a bit grueling, but to me, I think it's worth it. And primarily, I do events at libraries because I want to support libraries. And we're at a time right now where libraries are under tremendous pressure. And there's a lot of awful people trying to ban books and close libraries and get staff fired and pull resources. And you know, you look at history and you say, hey folks, the people who want to ban books are never the good guys. But the most wonderful thing about a library is it serves everybody in the community, every single person. And if you feel like you don't want to be served, you don't have to go. So I'm very happy to be at this library.
Hi. So, like many, probably most of the people in the room, you're my favorite author. I love your characters and the plot lines and the surprises. I love it. But I have an oddly specific question for you. One of the things that I always notice is your very creative use of similes, like, oh, Will flopped onto the couch like a tongue, or the broken bones clicked together like marbles. Like, they just paint the perfect, like, oh, that's so gross. I can totally hear that in my head. Where do you come up with those?
Well, thank you for noticing that. I also use the word snick in every book. And I got some Snickers out there who are like, they look for the snick. You know, I love language. I've always loved language, and I love finding the right word and the right way to paint a picture. I'm a very visceral writer, and I think particularly for other Southerners, I use a lot of touchstones that Southerners understand. Because I'll get a lot of queries from my Norwegian translator or whatever saying, what is this dog don't hunt? You know, what is a redneck alarm? These dogs under the porch, it doesn't make sense. But I do, I mean, we all know the usual metaphors and similes, and so I do enjoy coming up with something different. And I'm very selective about it too, because when you write something like that, you know, the brain expects certain patterns as you're reading, and I'm very aware that I'm kind of doing a switch. So I'm telling your brain, wake up, pay more attention to what's coming next, and this is how I'm going to do it.
Thank you.
Hi, I've read all of your books. I love them all. Huge fan. I have a couple of questions. What kind of cat is Dexter, and what's the cutest thing he does?
Well, he is a beautiful little feral boy who I worked with for 6 months before he was ready to come into the house. And the other cats hated him, and he has survived them both. And he does have many different names he goes by. But, you know, he's a very vocal cat, and there's no part of him that he does not like to have scratched, including the parts you do not want to scratch. And he loves to be held like a baby, so I know, he's just this little sweet. He's very chatty too. He's Burmese, so he's got a lot of that in him.
I've got a little feral one right now, so that's sweet. Last question. You mentioned a body farm. Have you visited a body farm? And can you describe what it's like if you have?
I haven't visited a body farm because they're outdoors. I have been to the autopsy suite at the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, And for many years, I didn't want to see an autopsy because I thought I've got these instructional videos and things like that they use for medical examiners, and I've got textbooks, and I've got medical examiners I can talk to, because I felt like I'm writing for fun, basically, and I don't want to dishonor someone whose life has been lost and who is being examined by the medical examiner. And I happened to be at the GBI one day, and they said, do you want to see an autopsy? And I have a really horrible problem where I don't say no to things like that. And so my mouth just, I was like, sure. And then we went in the autopsy suite. And one thing, you know, when you watch television shows, they're joking and they're like, you know, it's not taken very seriously. It's a very solemn room. And they take such care. And the victim was a homeless person who had died from alcohol toxicity. And I remember my first thought was that the people on television, I mean, we're used to seeing people on television and movies who are dead, and they look real, but a dead person looks fake, right, because of that. And I saw the autopsy and watched it, and you know, I think it brought something to my writing because I learned about the smells in the room, and it's not the body, it's the chemicals they use, and just the carefulness that they take with people who have met a horrible fate, right? And I wanted to bring that into Sarah. Now that being said, when I left and got home, my cats took one smell of me and went insane. And I ended up just having to throw my clothes away because I thought that they're never going to love me again. And I took the hottest shower, and it just kind of stuck in the back of my throat. So I wouldn't recommend it unless it's your job, but that was my experience, and it really helped me with the books and with Sarah.
Karin, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. One comment that appreciate for bringing up foster care. I was a foster care parent for about 10 years, and I understand the struggles and seeing my kids. I adopted them for them. So that's a great valued opportunity to see that being exercised through your books, and I appreciate that. One question: how do you feel about like some authors that have passed and they, I don't know, in their wills that they requested to have their characters developed through another author? How do you feel that would you want Will Trent or the other characters you developed? Would you want to have them continue on? Since we all have a short shelf life,
What do you know about me that you're not saying? I haven't given that much thought because I'm hoping that I don't have to make that decision for quite some time. You know, I guess it would be up to whoever is in charge of my estate. And I would hope that they would honor what I was trying to do in the books. You know, I mean, I'm certainly not comparing myself to Dr. Seuss, but the family has been very careful to make sure that everything is done in the way that he would like. And I think that's really important. So, you know, whatever decision gets made, I hope that they just keep to whatever is honest about the books and go with that.
Hi. Who would you say is your favorite author?
Well, I have a lot of favorite authors, and they're probably everybody else's in here too. You know, Lee Child, Lisa Gardner, Lisa Unger, Al Fairburg, Jeff Deaver, Mike Connolly, all those the goodies. But the one who has my heart and the author who terrifies the crap out of me is a woman who unfortunately passed away recently named Mo Hayder, Hayder. And she wrote a book called The Treatment that's just still sticks with me. And I read it many years ago. So she's fantastic. But if you've read Pretty Girls, you can read her. If you haven't read Pretty Girls, maybe read that first, and then it'll be a litmus test. Another author I love is a Scottish author named Denise Mina. And what I love about her books is she writes about crime in a very realistic way. Now, what I'm writing, you know, these are big commercial books, and the bad guys are serial killers. I mean, let's be honest, it's very rare that a cop like Will Trent would have so many serial killers in his. They would start to wonder if he was the serial killer, right? But Denise writes about what actual criminals are like, and they are people who make very bad choices. And then something happens and they mess up and they make more bad choices, and they keep making bad choices until they get caught. And it kind of reminds me of the Ripley books. Tom is always on the verge of getting caught, and he's always having to scramble and make up for things, and the tension comes from, how's he going to get out of this? And I love those sorts of books. It's kind of like the show Ozark, right? Because you have this anxiety about the really bad people, but I don't want them to get caught, but maybe they should get caught. And I just love that kind of psychological thriller.
Hi. How would you brag on yourself in your writing, and how often do you play to your strengths versus really trying to push out of your boundaries?
I don't brag on my writing at all. I honestly, I hope that people like my writing. I never want to feel like I've done the best book ever, because why would I write any more books? I want to write the best book I can write at that time. I'm really mindful of me being a poor college student and having to save up all my money to buy my favorite author's new book, and how personally betrayed I felt if the author hadn't just kind of phoned it in. So every time I write a book, even if I'm tired or my brain is in a fog, I always remind myself of that person and say, you've got to do this, you've got to deliver the best book you can. And I always push myself for that. And I love coming up with new ideas. I think one of the reasons why I've been able to have such a prolific career is I try to do something new in every book. This is my first locked room mystery. Pretty Girls was my first book without detectives, without lawyers, without, a safety net. And I like pushing myself and having that challenge of figuring out how to work a story in a different way and tell it in a new way, because what's the point if I'm not going to try to get better at it?
So I know that you said when you start, or before you actually start writing, you pretty much have the story already figured out what was going on. I was just wondering, does the title come first, or does the story come first?
It used to be that the title came first for me, and I felt really strongly about that. Like Blindsided, Kiss Cut, A Faint Cold Fear really drove the story. And then as I started writing Will Trent books, I realized one, I had used all my favorite titles, right? So I just ran out. But also, I started just letting the story get told, and then maybe there was a line that I felt was really strong that I could use as a title, and so I got away from one-word titles, and at some point, thanks a lot, Gillian Flynn, everybody wanted girl in their title. So I got besieged by that. But for the most part, I just let the text inform the title rather than the other way around.
Okay, I think that has wrapped up our questions. What a great experience this has been. Let's give our